Hi, I'm Dave Wurzel, and you're watching PHTV4, exploring today's topics. And specifically, on this show, we're going to be talking about celebrating the holidays during a pandemic. This may involve quite a balancing act between your expectations, things you remember about celebrating the holidays, and then, of course, what will it look like this year? You know, what you did in the past, what you'd like to do, and what you may have to deal with this year in terms of that. In addition to that, we'll take a look at the challenge of how you celebrate the holidays, but also maintaining your, your emotional and mental well-being. To help us explore these topics, Reverend Chris Hopkins is with us today. She's with the Center on Southwest Highway. Thank you, Chris, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Before we get started, maybe can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work at the Center?
Well, at the Center, I have been the pastoral director for about 10 years now. It was Reverend Frank Sanders who passed the baton on, so to speak. I've been a lifelong Chicago native, raised on the Southwest Side. My parents actually moved to Palos Heights in 1968.
Wow.
So, life has that funny zigzag way of I found myself back in the local hood, as you might say.
And you are a resident of Palos again.
I am, yeah. So it's kind of nice to come home to roost.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back, even though I know you were in Palos Park before.
Yeah.
Right, okay. I know you do a lot of, wonderful things at the Center. My wife and one of our daughters, we attended a retreat there. A few years ago, we did some of the meditation activities with you. I thought it was wonderful, work that was going on there.
Well, thank you.
I do want to reference, so to bring us to the topic about celebrating the holidays during the pandemic and how we deal with that, I was looking at your November newsletter. I saw you have your December one, so I'll have to check that later. But in the November one, I'm going to read it here, so I'm getting exactly correct here. From the Reverend Chris Hopkins and the Center staff, you have a section, and it says, "We're living in difficult times, to put it mildly," and I like the exclamation point there. "So much uncertainty, so much confusion, so much anxiety and fear." I don't think I could have created a better descriptor for, I think, what people are kind of feeling in so many, different directions right now. And yet, within, that fear, within that anxiety and confusion, then here come the holidays, right? And how do we celebrate the holidays? The people we want to celebrate them with, who can we get together with? I think the holidays in general generate high expectations for what that experience should look like.
Sure.
And so there's the balance that we're trying to struggle through. Like, what type of expectations can we, realistically create and enjoy, and then at the same time stay safe?
Yeah.
Right. So hopefully you can help us talk about this a little bit. I'd like to start with, I'm going to use a very specific little thing as an example of a changing expectation. I know the Center had a Christmas tea event, right, and that was canceled for this year. Can you tell us what that event was? And then maybe, I don't know if you've gotten any reaction to the canceling of it, maybe what else people could do in place of an event like that.
Well, David, I think one thing that's really important for all of us this year is, first of all, to acknowledge the sorrow that we're feeling because we can't celebrate the holidays like we always have. It's not a blip on the radar screen. These are important events that have had meaning in our lives. Like the Center Teas that you brought up, those were started by Lois Lauer, I bet you 20 years ago, maybe longer, because she worked at the Center for 34 years. And it was a way that she brought primarily women together. It didn't have to be, guys were invited, but it seemed like women kind of gathered. There was a story that was read. They shared Christmas tea, some lovely finger sandwiches. Moms brought their daughters, they brought best friends. It really became a time for folks to gather, and they can't do that.
So this sounds like quite a loss.
Yeah, so I think first of all to acknowledge the sorrow and that we're going to miss this. But then again, it opens up space to create something new. So new traditions, some things that have come across the ideas like, could we meet outside with a fire pit. I mean, the center has a summer camp, and we have lots of fire pits around the center. So could we put some, create a fire and bring some hot chocolate and, keeping socially distant and wearing our masks? But why couldn't some groups gather? I'm not in charge of that program, so I don't know if anything like that is being created. But I even think about that in terms of our own families, of following the protocols, the good medical advice to keep ourselves and those we love safe, but beginning to be creative in new ways of forming new traditions. I think that's really important.
I think that's an excellent, and kind of a nice segue here too, but an excellent example of be creative. We can do this. We can find other ways to still gather or celebrate. It's going to look different.
Yes.
I would imagine you've had this conversation. I'm going to share one. I feel like I've heard this. I just heard this question twice this past weekend. People, whether with family or with coworkers, talking about, well, what are you going to do this year? That question. Well, what are you going to do for Thanksgiving, or what are you going to do for Christmas or New Year's?
Yeah.
That question's turned up a lot. Unfortunately, I think the most common answer I've heard is, I don't know, or I don't know, followed by, I don't know. I just know it's going to look different.
Yeah.
And then sometimes people say, well, let's think about it and we'll come up with something.
Yeah.
Are there any other traditions you see changing, either for yourself or for the center this year?
Well, Christmas is a really big season at the center. I mean, we begin December 1st, the first Sunday of Advent. The chapel is decorated. We're still going to decorate the chapel.
Good, I was going to ask.
We're still going to decorate the chapel. Our chapel is still open. It is sanitized every day. Our housekeeping goes up there, they clean the chapel, the doorknobs to go in, the tops of the pews, those places where people handle.
Touching.
Because if people want to go and find a quiet place to be, they are still welcome to come. So the chapel is still open. We put a 20-foot Christmas tree in the Great Hall decorated with Queen Anne's lace. That tree is still going in this year, even though we're not hosting many of the Christmas events. So we're still doing the decorating. What we cannot do is, besides the Christmas teas, which we're not doing, we would have an evening of reading Bob Cratchit's The Christmas Carol. We'd have a professional storyteller come in, and when a Tiny Tim would sit down at the dinner table with his family, the group would break off to have the meal that Tiny Tim did. We can't do that this year. We had a Yule log where we would pack people in to the, as much as we legally could, and there's a Yule log ceremony. We'd sing Christmas carols and enjoy wassail and cookies. We can't do that this year. So we're all feeling a little sad, or a lot.
Say this is weighing heavy on me, right? And just listening to the things like, we can't do that.
We can't do this. We can't sing together. The one thing we are going to do, and this is where the creativity comes in, we've always done a pilgrimage to the manger. So we have separate stations where we read the stories from Scripture, the shepherds around, the fire. We have real sheep and a real fire, and the Magi come to visit. And we have, people dressed up as, kings and whatever, riding horseback to the manger. And we have a real baby in a real manger.
Wow.
So in years past, we don't do this as a group, like 100 to 150 people. We can't do it that way. What we are going to do, because this is outside, we're going to have stations where we'll have the scenes set up.
You're going to spread the event out.
And people in small groups of 25 or less with masks will go from station to station to station so that we can gather small, stay socially distantly apart, except for families, of course.
Right.
But then we can still celebrate the stories, we believe, in a safe way.
That seems like a really creative and very thoughtful way to maintain a tradition. Change it, adapt to a situation, but still find a way to allow people to have an experience like that.
That's what we're hoping.
That's a really good example. I guess that kind of gets into the other thing that we start talking about traditions. And when I was talking with my wife about it, and things we've done in the past and what can we do this year, and going through your newsletter, And I started doing that mental checklist of like, what does Christmas look like, or what does New Year's look like, or Thanksgiving? And, you know, I thought, well, can we, you know, the Christmas tea thing isn't going to happen, or, you know, I should talk to Lois. I see her, or I talk to her on occasion. I'm curious about that now. But, you know, I know my sister takes her daughters, and usually my mom would go with, and they'd go to the Walnut Room, you know, downtown for lunch, right? And I talked about, I had never done that. My sister's like, oh, you got to do that. And my daughters are in their 20s now. They've never done it. Like, that's something that should happen. But I don't, as of right now, I don't even know if that's an option. I would think it's not.
Bet you wouldn't be.
Yeah. I'm visiting the stores downtown, you know, the store windows and things like that. I'm not even sure that's an option. The caroling, I know for my wife's family, that was a Christmas Eve tradition. You know, they would have dinner and they would sing carols, and then they would, you know, maybe open some presents that evening. I don't see that happening this year. Something else maybe. Our kids are too old, but I'm thinking about taking your kids to see Santa.
Yeah.
I don't know that can happen anymore, right? So I started running this list, and it started getting really heavy. And then you start thinking about gathering with friends and family, whether they're nearby or coming from out of town. You know, so people you don't get to see often, but it's really nice to visit at these opportunities. So I guess, you know, my question.
Because there's a long litany of what we have to let go of, isn't there?
That stuff I'm just kind of dumping, like, oh my God, how do we handle that? Is the I mean, what kind of advice would you give somebody trying to plan for celebrating the holidays in some way, but, you know, knowing that some of these things aren't going to happen?
Yeah. You know, as I've been pondering it, not only from my work at the center, but in my own family life, you know, there's like a spectrum of activities as I see it. There's some that are, oh, they're fun and we've always done them that way, but they're not that hard to let go. You know, it's not that important that we do it this way. Some of them have a lot more emotional weight to them.
Yes.
One thing I've told myself, and it just occurred to me lately, every tradition that we celebrate now that means something to us had a first year. Somebody somewhere in our family's history or the center's history had this idea like, whoa, wouldn't it be cool if we did X, Y, or Z? Like go to the Walnut Room or, you know, have a Christmas tea. Why don't we say, hey, what about if we go in the backyard and gather with hot chocolate instead of the Walnut Room? You know, put a few extra lights around the backyard landscaping. Now's the time that we can be, so that our children and grandchildren, who knows, maybe in a generation they'll look back as like, yeah, I don't want to go to the, you know, do that. I want to do what our grandparents started. So I think we have some real opportunity to create something new.
That was, as I'm listening to you, that's the word that kind of creeped through my head. I think we're talking about an opportunity. We can look at it that way. We could choose to let it weigh us down, or we could say, all right, this is the reality I'm dealing with. Maybe there's an opportunity in here. I know I just had this conversation with, I stopped by my mom and dad's yesterday. My sister was over there at the time, and Thanksgiving came up, and you know, none of us knew what we were going to do. You know, we didn't have a plan yet. And we're like, well, we have some time to think about it. And my mother brought up the idea, well, you know, maybe we've had more campfires this last year than we've had for, you know, the previous 5 years. But, you know, she had that idea, well, you know, maybe what we do is we have dinner separately, but we come together for dessert around a campfire, you know. And I thought that was a nice idea, you know, whether being mostly reasonable, I think we can do that, you know. But I think you're right. I think looking at it as an opportunity is maybe a healthy approach to mitigating some of the weight or depression or sadness you might feel as a consequence of losing things.
You know, I think the tricky part too, but we're all experiencing this, not only as a nation, but worldwide. This pandemic has, it's a mystery in so many different ways. Like how it doesn't hardly affect anybody. You got asymptomatic folks or folks who get a little bit of a flu. And then as you and I were speaking before the show, we both know people who have lost loved ones. You know, my own family has lost my cousin's husband, whom I'd see a couple of times a year, passed. And so mindful of the deep sorrow with those that we've lost who are not here because of the pandemic, which as human beings, when we're experiencing those things, our first inclination is to gather. And I think that's what makes this season so hard, because of the memories and because of the loss involved. So I don't want to come across as saying, oh, well, this is really good, and we've got all these. That's true, but there's always that balanced awareness of those who have experienced the greatest loss of someone. And that's where I think we can and we ought to reach out. By telephone, we've come, I think a lot of us have become a lot more adept at using technology, even FaceTiming people, that those who are struggling with a death close to them, with the passing of someone they've lost, someone they've loved, we really have to be mindful of their sorrow and reach out to them more often than not. I think as a society, sometimes, modern society, we think you had 2 weeks to grieve the loss, let's move on.
Life doesn't work that cleanly.
Doesn't work that way. So I think we have to be mindful, even if we're not close, even if it's not our families. Of a neighbor down the street, how about a handwritten note in their mailbox? Thinking of you at this time, know that you're not alone, we're here if you need. Here's my phone number, call me if you need. We can still reach out to each other even if we can't give a hug.
Yeah, that's an excellent point too. The idea there are ways to still maintain contact, still ways to reach out, to people, and how important it is to still do that sort of thing. You remind me. I went to a funeral. This is back in August, I think. It was when things were better. It was just one of the strangest. I went to the service. One of the strangest services I'd been to. It was beautiful. It was well done, but we were sitting in a gym-like space, very spread out. They showed a video and they had people come up and do eulogies. It definitely felt different. It didn't feel traditional.
Sure.
But I still think it did a wonderful job of honoring the person and the family, allowing people to express sympathy and comfort or share with them, to let them know that yes, we care and we're interested in your welfare.
Yes.
I guess what we're talking about now kind of, dovetails into the thing that is beginning to happen, I think, and that is when you have these conversations about inviting family members over or not. And the example I think I mentioned to you earlier, in my wife's family, there are 12 kids. Now they don't all get together anymore, but if 2/3 of them do with their kids and their family, you're still talking about 30 plus people.
Oh yeah.
And my mom and dad, and I have a brother and sister, and then their kids. It's a 2-day event, Thanksgiving, in our family. So once with my wife's family, and then another day with my family, and that event might be 12 to 16 people. These are still a lot of people from different areas in a tight space. But then you bump into the issue of how do you ask them, or how do you respond? Because what I see in my family, my wife's family, is there is a range of reaction to this. Some people are very concerned about COVID and the spacing and how to gather or not. And there are others who have very little regard for it. They're not concerned. They're going to do the event and it's okay.
Yeah.
So if I can put you on the spot, how do you navigate that conversation as you've gathered with these people before, but it may not come across the way it did.
Wow.
Too much?
If I had the answer to that question, I'd be on Oprah right now, making a whole lot of money for the center. I don't have an answer, but I do know that in situation, people do have different feelings about what's appropriate, how do we gather. If we can, as a family, sit down and talk to each other. It is so sad. I've heard so many stories where even families are struggling because one doesn't want to wear a mask and one does. And we're arguing inside of our families. I do feel like we've gotten so wrapped up in our emotions that we've lost the art of listening to one another. You know, we used to, when I was a kid, my mom would always say to me, okay, before you say anything, count to 10. I've learned along the way, physiologically speaking, if we can pause and take a deep breath, there is something happens. You know, we got in our brains that fight, flight, or fight, flight, or I can think it's 3.
Fight or flight.
Yeah, that one. Okay, that part of our brain that blows up to do that, if we stop and take some deep breaths, that settles down. When that part of our brain blows up, it blocks our rational thinking. So when somebody says, I was so angry I couldn't think, that is physiologically true. If we can stop and pause, we calm down a bit. Our better nature takes over. We begin to think, who am I talking to? I'm talking to my mom. I'm talking to my sister. I'm talking to my cousin. I really care about those people. Our better angels come into play, right? So I think, at least in my own family, we're going to sit down and we're going to have a conversation. We're going to think about listening, truly listening about how we feel about things, what we're afraid of, what we're concerned about, what we're worried about. And hopefully, at least when we begin to understand each other, perhaps then the creativity might be able to enter.
And that's a really good point, because it's hard to be creative when you're stressed out or you're angry or, you know, when those negative emotions are coming into play.
We all have been in those conversations. All of a sudden we're wrapped up in the emotion and we're not hearing anything. We're just knowing what we feel, and our bodies are super tense, and we're on the offensive or defensive, and we're not at all engaged.
And that's a difficult position to be in, let alone, again, to come back to, how about, can we still celebrate the holidays? Can we still, you know, enjoy the season in some fashion? And then add in this kind of emotional turmoil in the experience. So any thoughts then on you know, what does that conversation look like? I mean, what are some things to go into it with so that I can, number one, I'll go back to, I love the idea of the pause. You know, I feel like I can experience it in my own life all the time. You know, whether you take time to go for a walk or just sit quietly, count to 10, meditate, whatever your, you know, thing is to, okay, let's get to where we're okay again.
Yeah.
You know, all right, now, you know, let's see if we can find a way to move forward. What does that look like in a conversation? So let's say I've gotten to that point now, but I'm sitting across from somebody who's like, no, this mask is not necessary, I'm not doing it. And I'm like, well, but I would like you to, or I'm going to, I need to.
Yeah. So in my experience, not that I've done a lot of, you know, conflict resolution, which is basically what we're talking about, it's always good to keep statements like I statements. Like, so I'm not accusing. I am more comfortable wearing a mask. I feel as if it protects me and I can protect you. Then when the other person, so keeping it an I statement, like I can't judge your intention. I can't accuse you of you're doing X, Y, and Z because I don't know if that's where you're coming from.
Right.
But if you speak for yourself, I know when we get together, we stop and say, let's just pause for a minute, even before we begin this conversation. Let's just have a minute or two to take a good, deep breath. And then who's ever kind of invited the conversation to start might be willing to lay out a few ground rules. Hey guys, we're family. I know we basically love each other on most days. You know, some days it could be debatable. We all have
It is the irony in this
families.
situation, right?
Yeah.
That you are family, you're your friends, these are people you care about, they care about you. So you should be able to get to that point.
Let's start with that.
Yeah.
Let's start with the care and the common bond of family. Let's see if we can keep our conversations to talking about our own feelings first. Let's pause and see if we can really listen to what the other person is trying to say. And then, you know, then it's a moment-to-moment engagement, and hopefully, and it is hopefully, because not every, I have to believe, and I've seen it, where you can come to a common understanding where, okay, you're going to wear a mask, I'm not, but at least we won't be putting each other down.
Right.
You know? At least we'll be respecting
I was going to say, that
each
was the
other.
word, yeah. I think if you show respect, you know, acknowledge this is me, this is what I feel, this is my situation, and not be accusatory or judgmental in some way, I think that shows respect. I think it would be easier at that point that I know that you respect my opinion. It'll be easier for us to move forward to some type of resolution or solve a problem.
Yes. Yes.
So these topics overlapping here. Another issue I wanted, and it probably would take hours of this, you would be touring the country and all the talk shows, because I'm talking about also, what about managing the stress and anxiety? The holiday season for me, as much as I love it and enjoy these holidays, I do think they generate stress and anxiety, and now we're dealing with the pandemic on top of it. Any thoughts on how we can manage that a little bit?
Well, you know, a couple of things, actually. Number one, I, like you, I've heard lots of people say, you know what, I love the holidays, but I'm exhausted by January 1st. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe with some of the parties that we never wanted to go to, I mean, how many office parties people said, geez, I really don't want to go there. No, we're not going there. There's no office party. We could take some of this enforced separation and silence, especially during the month that's the darkest month of the year for us here in this area, to really kind of go inward. I mean, for me as a Christian minister in a Christian community, you know, Christmas is a spiritual, religious holiday. Mm-hmm. That's really important for us. It's all about not only remembering what happened when Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but also making it a present day reality. I mean, if, you know, living Christmas is as important as celebrating Christmas. Right. So when you talk about taking a walk or sitting around a campfire, those are quiet times that we could reflect upon the true meaning from our perspective of what Christmas really does mean for us. And then how can we live that? So I think taking time away for meditation, silence, listening to the carols, you know, is a lovely spiritual experience. But then I do think we can still reach out, because that's what Jesus was all about, in my estimation. He was reaching out to his neighbors, to that person on the other side of the proverbial road, you know? How many times have I heard of food banks?
Right.
Having more and more people who have lost their jobs are seeking out assistance for food. They could use all the monetary support they can, you know, garner right now. So we could, if we could reach out and help our local food bank, find out who our neighbors are, you know, give them a phone call, put a note, a Christmas card, even if you've never sent them a Christmas card before. So I think on one level it's good to go inwards, but sometimes we can get wrapped up in ourselves, and there are still ways that we can reach out to others.
Yes.
That brings, for me, the spirit of Christmas alive.
I think, I mean, for me personally, I love that emphasis and the idea that kind of turning inward, being reflective, especially. And maybe I'm exaggerating, but I feel like over the last few years, I'm tired of watching the news highlights where people are fighting over sales at stores. You know, you know that. You know, like, what is our focus? To me, that seems so the opposite of what the season should be about in general, right? You know, where are we focusing? How are we, you know, conducting ourselves, and how reflective are we being about, you know, what's happening this season? I do have to. I'm going to get a little bit derailed here, but this is going to. I'm going to bring it into my next question.
Okay.
You reminded me several years ago. We started a tradition with our neighbors. I think one person did it, and then we reciprocated, and then it kind of mushroomed. I think there's about 4 or 5 neighbors near us who we only know in passing. You know, we say hi to each other, talk to each other over the fence, kind of stuff. But we all exchange some type of baked good at Christmas. You know, like cookies or you know, something. And I know it's going to get dropped. They'll knock at our door. They'll say Happy Holidays or Merry Christmas, and you know, we'll at some point do that. And it's a beautiful little tradition. It's a nice little way of reaching out. And then I'm wondering, are we going to do that this year? Like,
Yeah. They say, the food is not an issue. I mean,
right. And you wipe down the surfaces, it should be okay. It's and I guess that kind of, go ahead.
I was going to say, those are the personal decisions. That's
Right.
where, the honesty among neighbors. I mean, you'd feel really awkward if somebody dropped something on your doorstep and you didn't
Kick it
return the
away.
favor, So again, it's, communication is key in
Yeah.
so many, whether it's in your family or your neighborhood. Open communication, honest, respectful communication is huge.
Yeah, if you don't have that, you're not really, I mean, number one, you're probably not living in the spirit of the holiday.
Yeah.
And then you can be able to celebrate the way you'd like to.
Yeah.
How about you? Do you want, if I can put you on the spot, family traditions or things that are being reconfigured this year, or things that you're not going to do, or you're going to do this instead, that kind of thing?
Well, typically my family, we celebrate Christmas services at the center. So we have a 4:30 service at the center. Since my mom was a little girl, so that's like the earlier 1900s, extended family, big Polish Catholic extended family gathering together with homemade sausage and big meal and Santa coming and cousins running all over, and we've kept that tradition all these many years. That is not happening this year. We're talking among my own personal family. I've got 4 kids about, do we gather just us as a family? We need to have that honest conversation, because there are activities that each family is engaged in that some think are okay, some are not quite comfortable with. So we are going to have that conversation, and I'm not sure what the resolution of that conversation will be. The men of the family would always get together and make sausage, That's not happening this year. I'm not sure if it's going to be replaced, or we're just going to say, you know what? We know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. We know that, gratefully, there are really smart people working on vaccines out there. We know that this pandemic will come to an end. That's going to happen.
Right.
We want all of us to be there next year when we
The
celebrate.
next one.
We are going to miss one of our family members whom we mourn his loss. And John won't be there, and it does break our hearts. But we want to do the best that we can so everybody else can show up, so we can sing and tell the stories about, remember when he did that, next year. And we don't want to, we don't want to run the risk of losing more.
I think that's an excellent, point to the idea that this will help us. Number one, I agree. We're going to get through this. There is another side to it. In some ways, it's going to help us appreciate the things that we had, the things that we were able to do. We can all, over the course of my life, Christmas does not look now like what it did 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. It's always changing. But even this year, it's going to be different. But next year will be different, and maybe we'll be revisiting, or like you said, maybe some new traditions will have been established. I know for me and my family, one thing that we started when the kids were little, now they live on their own, but they will come back and stay overnight for 2 around the holidays, is that we'll go for a walk. Now, we used to do it a lot when they were home, but we'd bundle up, and their dad is weather crazy. I am not a fair weather walker. Unless it's thunder and lightning, okay, we'll take a pass. But if it's blizzard or raining, we're going.
Yeah.
And we'll bundle up for the holidays, and we'll go for a walk through the neighborhood, and look at how the houses are decorated and things like that. And then we'll come home, and we'll do the hot chocolate or tea, and watch a holiday movie. That tradition, I think, will survive this year.
Yeah.
It'll be just us.
Yes.
But it'll still, I think it'll be quiet. I think it'll be nice, and still things we can enjoy.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to a last line when we wrap this up. In that November posting, one of my favorite lines in the entire thing I thought was very good, very thoughtful, but this line especially, you wrote, "Even though our doors are closed for the time being, our hearts are open." I think it's a beautiful line. Any last thoughts you want to share?
I think one of the worst things we could do as human beings would be to close down our hearts, get so entrenched in our opinions and so close-minded by our fear that all of a sudden we shut down and people we love the most, we exclude them. Or we get so angry that even when we make it through the pandemic, we aren't able to come back together again. That we say things that cause such hurt to each other. And you see that in our families, you see it in our nation. I mean, you see it worldwide. This is a serious problem.
Yeah.
We're all in this together. We're families, we're one nation, we're one globe.
Mm-hmm.
How do we learn ways of being in relationship that doesn't create permanent walls between us, that will take years to somehow break down again? I don't want to say tear down. So
people hold grudges.
Oh my gosh. So I think, however, that's where the communication, the respect, the being willing not to throw accusations at others out of anger or fear, because I honestly think much of our anger is rooted in fear.
I would think they're very closely connected.
You know, so be mindful of our speech. Be mindful that people have different perspectives. We have to honor and be respectful towards each other, even as we try to keep us all safe. So as we walk through the days, as we talk to our family members, as we, go along in community activities or non-activities, whatever we choose to do, we really ought to keep in mind that of our love and respect for each other as family, as neighbors, as community members, that we're all in this together, and not to create more harm than this virus is already.
Yeah. That is a great, kind of a great way to, I think, go into this, that, especially if we can work on the communication respect within our family, with our friends, and I personally believe that's good. That has a ripple effect.
Yeah.
If I'm in a better place, I'm going to be in a better place with other people, and we are in this together. Whether we want to or we have different perspectives on it, we are in it together.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you so much. I really value and appreciate the words you shared, the wisdom you shared with us today. I also appreciate the work you do at the center. I hope to get back and join you in some meditation there, and also helping people navigate the holidays and the challenges they're facing. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I'm Dave Wurzel. Thank you for watching Spotlight Issues, celebrating the holidays during a pandemic. Stay healthy and happy holidays.